The Collective Whisper Podcast with Simon K. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Collective Whisper Podcast. I am your host, Simon K. So we have a very special guest on the show tonight, and we hope you stay tuned to listen to that. And we hope you're well and everything is going great in your life. And we just like to say thank you for supporting the show. Please spread the word. Please share it with your friends and review us and like us and subscribe wherever you see those buttons. Thank you very much. This week's guest is Mr. Tom Brislin. Tom Brislin has performed on tour and on recordings for several of the biggest names in classic rock, including Yes, Meatloaf, and Debbie Harry of Blondie. In 2019, Tom joined the legendary Kansas as the group's keyboardist, backing vocalist. In 2020, Kansas released the album The Absence of Presence on the InsideOut Sony music label. Tom contributed writing credits to 7 of the 9 tracks on the album. Prior to joining Kansas, Tom recorded and performed with The Sea Within. The progressive rock group features top musicians Roine Stolt, Flower Kings, Jonas Reingold, Steve Hackett Band, Daniel Gildenlöw, Pain of Salvation, Marco Minnemann, Stephen Wilson, and Casey McPherson, Flying Colours. The group assembled in London in 2017 to record their debut album, which was released on June 22, 2018 on Sony InsideOut Music. Tom was the keyboardist for 2017 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees Yes on their 2001 Symphonic Tour. The tour was documented on the concert DVD Blu-ray Yes Symphonic Live. Tom's connection to Yes has led to collaborations on stage and in studio with several notable artists, including Renaissance, Camel, Anderson Stoll, Francis Dunnery, and The Sin. Tom has toured as a pianist for multi-platinum selling legend Meatloaf and was featured on the album's videos, Storytellers, and Couldn't Have Said It Better. He was touring keyboardist for legendary Blondie singer Debbie Harry in support of her solo album Necessary Evil and served as the group's musical director. He is also a frequent performer with fellow New Jersey native Glenn Burtnick, the Weakling Sticks, the orchestra. Tom wrote, performed, and produced the critically admired album Hurry Up and Smell the Roses in 2012. Released directly to fans through a successful crowdfunding campaign, the album features Tom's varied array of musical influences under the stylistic umbrella he calls cinematic pop. Prior to his solo work, Tom was the songwriter, musical director, and producer of the band Spirally. The group released 4 albums, 2 EPs, and toured the US in support of groups such as OK Go, They Might Be Giants, and Violent Femmes. Welcome to the show, Tom. Welcome to the show, Mr. Tom Brislin.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. We were chatting over the last few months about getting you on, and I know obviously you're touring with Kansas, and your tour is starting soon, or it's already happening?
It's already happening. The way Kansas tours is sort of an ongoing stream of shows. We go home regularly and we fly out and do a few shows, fly home, repeat. We're off for the last couple of weeks, but we're kicking off again soon.
I think, are you playing in Kansas itself on the 18th of May?
That's correct, yes. Manhattan, Kansas.
Yeah, because I looked at that date and I was like, Manhattan? And then I saw the K and I didn't realize there was a Manhattan in Kansas.
I didn't know that either.
You were thinking, oh, a home gig.
Right, yeah, sure.
And what is Manhattan, Kansas like compared to the real Manhattan?
I'll let you know.
You let me know. Okay. Well, I can imagine though, because Kansas are such a big band and they have a big following, so they must play pretty big stages and arenas still, no?
We play predominantly in theaters, which is really nice venue for the show that we're doing, which is the Point of No Return Live and Beyond. So we're doing that entire album from beginning to end, and it's got a lot of the deep cuts and progressive aspects. So it's very theatrical. And so the theaters that we're doing, it seems just right for the type of show. Now, in the summertime, we'll do festivals, we'll do outdoor performances, and we even hit some of the casinos, and it's a bit more of a rockin' greatest hits set. So those are the 2 shows that I'm doing with the band right now.
Okay. Have Kansas ever done like a Las Vegas residency in any of the years?
Not since I've been in the group, but we are hitting Vegas this year. But just a one-off. But yeah, I do know some groups that have gone to Las Vegas and set up residency at a theater and sort of live there. I find that to be kind of interesting. Who knows? You never know. It might be in our future for all I know.
With some of the big artists have done it, Celine Dion and Adele, I think, did it recently. And there's other bands on my head have done it, but it seems to be kind of a new kind of phenomena where the casinos are thinking, okay, let's get some of these classic artists or newer artists in for a run of a month or 2 months. And, obviously it generates big bucks and brings a lot of people to the gambling tables, doesn't it?
They like to bring the people in. In fact, last year we played a casino on the East Coast of the U.S. called Mohegan Sun, and it was we were told that it was a somewhat private show. It wasn't, the tickets weren't available to the general public. There was only by invitation to the VIPs and high rollers. So we thought we would be playing in a small venue on the site of the casino, but it turned out to be we were playing in the arena. It was where the basketball team plays, and it was packed. So I guess there was just like sort of a appreciation for people who go there regularly. But sometimes when you play shows like that, people will come because it's a free ticket and they'll check out some songs and then they'll go gamble. But this was not like that. We had everybody there from beginning to end having a great time. And it was like, it was cool to experience the Kansas music in that setting. Because I had played arenas in the past with Meatloaf and with Yes, but with Kansas, like I was saying, we're more in the theatrical side of things. But to let it loose in an arena was quite fun.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And Kansas are a big band and big sound, and if you're in the right setting and the right theater, I can imagine it's so powerful, for the fans to listen to all of that kind of music and all coming at you through amazing speakers. It's just such an experience for them, isn't it?
I would think so. It's interesting because we on stage, we get a different read on it because we're using the earphones and it's very tight. Like we're all locked into each other on stage, but they do have some microphones facing the audience that we can bring into our headphones, so we can have some of that ambiance and some of get a feel for what it's like out there, and it's pretty formidable.
So we'll come back to Kansas in a moment. I want to go back a little. We'll go back in time a little. And one interesting fact I just realized when I was researching you is that our birthdays are very close, because you're October 5th, 1973, and I'm October 2nd, 1973. So I'm 3 days older than Tom Brislin.
Okay, I will ask you for your sage advice.
I don't know if there's anything I can teach you with my 3 days. Even we're of similar age, but as I said, you're experiencing far more than me. That's one up for you anyway. So tell me, early life in New Jersey, what was that like? Because New Jersey now probably has changed a lot from when you were born and grew up there, yes?
Sure, of course. I mean, there's just so many more people here now, even though it was pretty packed as long as I could remember. And the main thing was that we had access to New York City. So even ever since I was a kid, my parents were taking me to the museums, to the shows, and around Christmas time, things like that. So, because there's a train that goes to Manhattan right from my old hometown. And so it was really interesting because we saw, I first went to New York City in the late 70s. I don't really remember much of it, but seeing how that place had changed by the time I was of age to go there by myself and start playing clubs with my band, the city had taken on quite a different feeling. It was still gritty, but it was definitely a bit more friendly to what we were doing. Just getting in there, playing the clubs, and being part of that scene, and also I think when I was a kid, it seemed like there was a real bustling music scene, a rock scene in New Jersey that my siblings who are older than me, they went to go see the bands, and my brother played in groups and was part of that scene. And by the time I was old enough to start playing gigs on my own, the people, Bon Jovi and all these bands from New Jersey that had made it had been established, and the next upcoming scene was Seattle on the West Coast. So it was a bit different. Like it was almost like, hey, where'd everybody go? We're here, we're ready to rock. But there were still plenty of music fans left in the state to come see us play. But it was a different vibe. It wasn't the record label feeding frenzy like it had been in the 80s. But everybody I know who played in that scene loves to tell me about how great it was and how there were bands playing every night, and everybody was in the clubs packed. Whereas by the time I came around, we had to do a bit more work. We had to really hone our craft and get people's attention and get them to want to see what we're doing. in a sense, or almost after it, I think. It was like we just had to kind of build a new scene.
You were on the tail end of it.
One of the interesting things of coming out of the 90s into the 2000s, the region where you were from was becoming a little bit less vital just because of the internet. And now the fan bases were connecting from all over the world, and so we could, if bands that were smart enough to seize on what the trends were with internet and eventually social media, it became more of a thing where, hey, we know that our fans are out there and we have to get our music out to as many people as we can using the internet. And that way we'd find our tribe there. And it was a little less geographically intensive, I guess you would say.
Yes. And that happens because you can imagine, for example, even in Seattle, after Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, all those big bands, Mudhoney, sorry. And then the thing is, with those, after, for aspiring musicians and people who came later to the scene, it probably was a little bit of a struggle because you always get kind of labeled then as trying to copy these bands, even though you could have originated from the same scene. But once you come after it, it's harder to say you're original, isn't it? What neighborhood were you in New Jersey?
Well, I would say that some would call it the New York City suburbs. And also there was a college town near where I grew up called New Brunswick. And so we would build there. We would try to do shows there in the college town. And also we always had our sights set on New York City.
New York, it's funny because obviously it's so close to New Jersey, but maybe for aspiring musicians, it's much harder because you're competing to get these gigs and you're competing to get like maybe weekend residencies and things. And there's a lot of great bands in the city already. So when you're coming from New Jersey, you're making that 30, 40-minute trip in, but it's still hard work, I imagine, no?
Everything about it was because, like you said, there was such a scene of great bands coming to the city or being from the city that we knew that we had to be at the top of our game. We weren't going to be big fish in a small pond. We had to make some noise in that grand scheme of things. And it was a lot of work, just like you say, getting there, getting into the city. And we didn't have a road crew or anything. We were carrying our own gear in and trying to find a parking spot and trying to make sure your car doesn't get towed away while you're loading your gear into the venue, or that gear doesn't get stolen. And so it exactly. Really tested your mettle because the people who just wanted to play casually and have a little bit of fun with a band, once they started seeing that was what it entailed, a lot of people just stopped working so hard. But the bands that really wanted it, like us, and right. we stuck it out and we learned how to make it work for us. But again, we were an indie band. We never had a major record label deal, and this was Spiraling, was the group, and this was my songwriting. So I had that extra incentive because I knew it was my vision and it was the stories that I wanted to tell and the band that we wanted to be.
Obviously you're the youngest in 5 siblings, I think, and everybody in your family kind of was musically inclined in a certain way or played different instruments. So did you kind of have at one stage like a family band or that you would jam together in the house?
I would jam with various siblings. We didn't have a whole Partridge Family thing going on, but 2 of my sisters were my first piano teachers. My brother was the one who showed me what it was like to be in a band, and we would jam whenever we could. My other sister had the great record collection, and so I was learning about music from her, and my folks just loved it, and they liked to sing as well. My father used to sing in a band back long before I was born, and so it was just an environment where that's what was happening. But for me to get my first bands going, I had to find my friends at school, and I started trying since I was 10 years old. We didn't have any equipment, so everyone would just come over to my house because I had the piano, and somebody had an acoustic guitar or some pots and pans to bang on for drums. And then, like when I was about 12, 13 years old, I actually got really serious about it and I've been on a trajectory since that time of forming bands, having a band, going to the next group, saving up for a keyboard, then saving up for an amplifier. It's funny because the gear was like one of the big hurdles to overcome, because we were like, yeah, let's jam, let's do a band, and then we're like, with what? What are we going to use? And then we became gearheads, and we're looking at all the magazines and sort of checking out what everybody was using.
Yeah, you need the gear.
But I remember that was also one of the tests, because we had to scrape our pennies together to get this stuff happening, and it was not cheap.
Was it always piano for you, or like at the beginning, when you were getting those lessons from your sister and I don't know who was playing what, the rest of the siblings, but was there a time you thought, okay, will I try guitar, drums, piano? What kind of made you gravitate towards the piano? Was it the influence of your other siblings?
To a point, yes. And also the fact that we had the piano in the house, and it was
right.
Like that was the entertainment center. There was much time spent around the piano as there was around the TV, and if not more. And so I got started with piano lessons first. But I always, as soon as I discovered the rock albums, I knew that I wanted to write my own songs. So I was trying to write my own songs, write my own lyrics, draw album covers for songs that didn't exist yet. And I was always tapping my hands and stuff too. So I knew that there was a drummer in there as well. And vocals came a little bit later, but almost out of necessity. Like when I was a teenager, one of my bands, it was like we could never find a singer. And so I did some of the vocals, but I really wanted to sort of just be the mad scientist with all the keyboards and do some harmonies. But becoming a lead vocalist was something that emerged later. And in high school, I was also doing a lot of drumming, like in the school band, and just jamming. I always wanted to get behind the drum set of whoever had one. And so I've always been like sort of a recreational but passionate drummer on the side. But and then I've attempted guitar over the years. So I always wanted to play guitar as well, but I never quite got the hang of it. Also because I'm left-handed with guitar. And I was always flipping everybody's guitar upside down to play it. And so no one could really teach me because I was playing an inverted version of what they knew how to do. And later on in life, I acquired a couple left-handed guitars and I consider myself an absolute novice for life on guitar. But I do love those instruments, and I dabbled with woodwinds as a teenager. But it always comes back to the piano. That's the core. And all the electronics and synthesizers and organ, electric piano, everything branched out from the piano for me.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I do see sometimes the Dream Theater keyboardist, Jordan Rudness, he actually now has become quite accomplished on the guitar. And it seems like it was kind of a pet project of his. But it's very interesting because when you come from a certain area where you play and then you go to another instrument, you can see sometimes those players have that like keyboard style on the guitar. Do you know what I mean? And even like I saw you played with Marco Minnemann, and he is a good guitar player too, isn't he?
Yes, he's a good all-around musician and songwriter.
Yeah.
When we worked together on The Sea Within, he was bringing in some of his writing as well as his drumming.
Yeah, and I've seen him play guitar and really good.
Yeah, and what's funny is that if I was to get enough ability on guitar to do it publicly, I would be doing something far different from what I do on the keyboards, because I know how to express myself with that language on this instrument. Well, I wouldn't want to start from scratch just to express the same things. I'd be playing rhythm guitar, loud rock chords, stuff that the keyboards don't bring.
Yeah.
I would just be chugging away.
I remember in one or two groups I played like MIDI synth guitar, and it was kind of an eye opener because for years I'd played guitar and I was teaching guitar, and then we were trying to get a keyboard player for this band, and I was playing lead guitar in the band, and there was a rhythm guitar player, and I had kind of been thinking, oh, maybe I'll try get a Roland MIDI synth guitar. And so I got it, and we were learning like Queen songs and different songs. And then you realize, wow, hold on. This is like another skill, learning how to play keyboard parts on the guitar, and then not only like where you're playing chords and you slide them down the frets, you can't have that sliding sound. So you have to move your fingers differently as well. And then So that was one thing. And then the second thing was when I would set up for a gig, you would have to set up like a keyboard amp that was coming out of your MIDI synthesizer. And then you would also have the guitar amp. So I had two setups, and you also had two possibilities for things to go wrong. So after I did it in two bands, I kind of thought, okay, I don't know if I want to do it anymore. It's a lot of learning and a lot of work.
It's like, what is born of necessity? Where did you was it something where you're like, we really need these synth parts going on in the tune, and we don't have a synth player. Let me see if I can cover it here. Or do you bring it in a new direction and use the guitar synth as its own instrument? Something like what Pat Metheny or King Crimson did, where they created a whole new texture and a whole new sound and articulation, which I really like that. I like when it also the technology of the time, the way that it tracks the notes, it was imperfect, and that added a cool factor to it as well. So sometimes, we want the technology to serve us and to bring out what we have in our minds, but sometimes the limitations of it just force some new things into the world that can be pretty cool.
Yes. And what's your stance then on when you're playing with different bands, whether it be Kansas, Yes, or, the especially more progressive bands where there's a lot of melody lines and, you're doubling of vocal lines and melody lines sometimes. For some bands then who kind of double the guitar and doing guitar chords. So I mean, there's been some amazing emulation software when it comes to keyboards and that can emulate and recreate guitar sounds. So was that something that you got into at an early stage as well, where you were like doing guitar songs on the keyboard?
There are a couple instances, or a few instances, where that might be something that comes into play, but not because I want to replace a guitarist in a band. That just doesn't really interest me. But if I want to get the vibe, the distortion, for instance, I could still do that with organ sounds. Now, there have been a couple instances where I have used guitar emulations. One was on the Yes Symphonic tour, where we did Owner of a Lonely Heart, and Steve Howe wasn't interested in playing that very wild 80s Trevor Rabin guitar solo. So I offered to play it on synth, and then he was like, okay, yeah, that sounds acceptable to me, so he was on board as long as I covered it. And what's funny is that some people even think that was a synth to begin with because it was so affected and so wild and harmonized. But I did have to get some of the growl and some of the gnarly aspects of what the original guitar part were. Now, if you watch Yes Symphonic live and you hear Owner of My Heart, like, it doesn't sound exactly like a Trevor Rabin guitar solo, but it is the part and it is the spirit of it. So I had to, and that was with 2001 technology. So that was another hurdle to overcome because they hadn't made the advances in emulation that we have now. Nowadays, I use guitar emulation for my demos if I want to show the guys in Kansas a new song I'm working on. And sure, they'd be happy just to hear me play the ideas on a piano. But if I want to really convey what I'm hearing in my mind, I'll put on a guitar emulation patch and sort of approximate to them what I was thinking. That way, it's good enough that they can say, okay, I get it. And then they can play it on the real deal and their way. And that way, it's really more of an imagination tool rather than trying to fool anyone or to take anybody's place.
No, I understand. And this is the thing, isn't it? Because even though you have emulation software, whether it be MIDI synth for guitar or, the guitar sounds on pianos, they are different instruments because, the piano can be far more expressive in the fact you can be more melodic with both hands. I know there's a lot of amazing guitar players can do that too, but in general, you have a lot of chords and then you have lead breaks and stuff. So what's really interesting, isn't it, is when you see keyboardists and how they approach playing guitar lines on those. And as you said there, some people aren't interested at all and other people kind of like that idea. And I saw recently there was, I cannot think of his name. I saw a guy, I think he's from Austria or somewhere, and he plays the Hammond organ, but he has like this tremolo arm on it. Have you ever seen this guy?
Oh, I think maybe, are you referring to the clavinet? with the big bar on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the clavinet. Yes.
there were a few players. I think I know who you're referring to, and also George Duke. I think was one of the pioneers of that in the '70s. It was a modification.
Right.
Yeah, I played the clavinet.
I saw this guy playing blues and like Jimi Hendrix stuff, and I mean, obviously with that like whammy arm, it's amazing. After a while, it gets to be the same, though. That's the thing. But it's amazing instrument.
Well, for the people watching this who may not be familiar, the clavinet is a keyboard, but there are real strings inside of it, and each key presses down on a string, and there's a big pickup system in it, like a guitar. So you can actually make that instrument feed back like a guitar, and even though the articulation is that of a keyboard, that's one thing where it can get really wild and have the spirit of guitar, especially if they added this thing called the castle bar, which was this curved piece of metal where you could like ram down on it and it would bend the strings slightly so you could get to some of those guitar bends in it. Now I've used a clavinet on the latest Kansas album and I've used it on my albums, and I like to always set it up near an amplifier so it starts to howl
Okay.
like a guitar. But again, it's still like
grunt.
in the family of guitar types, but I'm not trying to fool anyone to thinking that I'm a guitarist. It's just I'm trying to get like a little bit of a variation, but it's got the beefiness of it, and I have a lot of fun playing that instrument.
It's quite interesting because obviously when you have, I'm not an expert on pianos, but when you have a grand piano, you have strings inside it. So the clavinet has a similar system, but obviously on a shorter scale and everything. So it's like a baby grand or something, but the strings are set up like, are they like set up like a guitar in that they're different scale lengths or one scale length?
Well, it goes all the way back to the clavichord, which I think was a keyboard instrument that even predated the piano. So instead of
Okay.
having the strings like on a grand piano, which if you're sitting at the piano, they'd be going away from you. These strings are under the keyboard in a diagonal, and they're much shorter, but
like a pedal steel guitar type thing.
yeah, in a way. And each key presses this sort of rubber plunger, hammers on to each of the strings. So there are 60 strings, one for each key, and they all need to be tuned. So on the times where I've
Right.
performed with it, in fact, there are some things on YouTube. Spiraling would used to play this Christmas benefit show every year where we played our version of Nut Rocker, which was Emerson, Lake and Palmer's version of a 60s rock song based on the Nutcracker Suite. Yeah. And Keith Emerson used a clavinet on the original. So I was like, I want to start bringing my clavinet out. And it was only for that special occasion because before the show, I was there with a flathead screwdriver tuning every string on the clavinet.
If you don't mind me asking, how long, like, is it like a well-tuned guitar in the sense that it will stay in tune for the show, or do you have to retune it midway through, or like it depends how you play it?
Well, it held on pretty well for me, even though, and I beat the thing, I beat the thing up, but they weren't really designed to be roadworthy. But I guess mine was in good working order, and the tuning pegs stayed pretty solid for me. If I was to play another show, I would still touch it up in between, but I never found myself hearing a sour note during the show once I tuned it.
Right,
It stayed pretty stable for me.
So when you go back to like when you really started getting into playing, piano on the keyboard, you were listening obviously to lots of, bands, Foreigner, Yes, Led Zeppelin, all these types of bands, and then the 80s pop from the UK and everything. So was there a point when you thought, I kind of like the progressive kind of fusion music? Was there a point when you just didn't want to play piano as backing, but you wanted it to be a voice of its own?
Yeah, when I started in high school, I was starting to get hip to jazz, and it's funny because the big band jazz of Count Basie and hot jazz Dixieland, that I was hearing that and getting into it, but I was also starting to discover instrumental fusion like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock, and that was exciting too. And it's funny because that was also a gateway into the bebop and hard bop acoustic jazz. But I just loved the synth soloing, and it had, because a lot of those classic albums were recorded in the 70s, it had a similar timbre to the prog rock that I grew up liking. I heard the mini Moog sounds and the Hammond organs and the Fender Rhodes piano. So it had a lot of the same palette. Like if you listen to Return to Forever, I mean, that's right at home with progressive rock to me, even though it's some would consider it in a different subgenre. But so there was an appeal there for me, and I just literally was just into so much of what was coming out, no matter what the genre was. But as an instrumentalist, that jazz stuff, yeah, as an instrumentalist, the jazz and the fusion and even the progressive rock, that was something that I could sink my teeth into as a player and learn about the harmonic and melodic vocabulary. Whereas the other stuff had the great, if I listen to Duran Duran, there's not a lot of chops going on, but it's a lot of great sounds and orchestration and things that would lift the song up.
A lot of those 80s pop songs, they had synth melody lines in certain places, but there's a lot of pads and everything, isn't there?
Yeah, and I love that. Anything that elevates the listening experience and brings the song to the place where it belongs.
Here's a question, obviously, for people when they start out playing piano in general. A lot of piano teachers, give them songs, and rather than say, for example, here's an Elton John song and this is how the piano is played, they put the vocal line into it. So, you'll always hear someone learning the piano and it'll have the vocal melody included. So that obviously is great as well. But there comes a point, I think, where a lot of piano players go, oh, that's not how the actual song goes. But in my songbook, the vocal line is included with the piano line. So for some people who are playing these songs from sheet music and maybe never listening, there must come a realization, oh, I have to play less when I play it while somebody sings.
Yeah, because like you said, those song sheets that were called piano vocal or piano vocal guitar, those were meant to be marketable to as many people as possible. If you were a singer, you could buy that piece of sheet music. If you were a guitarist, you could and read the chord symbols. If you were a pianist, you could buy it and either back up a singer or play the whole piece yourself and have it be recognizable. So it's interesting because a lot of times those pieces of sheet music would have three. Well, it would have the grand staff for left and right hand of the piano, and then there would be a separate staff for just the vocal line. And depending on who the publisher was or what the song was or how easy or hard it would be, they would incorporate the melodic line into the piano part rather than just have the piano playing chords. But if you are knowledgeable about chord symbols and how to interpret them, then as a keyboard player, piano player, I could just play those chords if I was playing with a singer and I wouldn't have to play the literal melodic lines. Now, it's funny because there are some preconceived notions about that. And like some would say, well, if there's a singer, you shouldn't be playing the melodic line on the piano, like if you're with a band. However, there are so many examples in classic music where the piano player is playing right along with the vocal line, especially, and I discovered this when I worked with Meatloaf.
Yeah, because Meatloaf, his songs are that type of style, aren't they?
Yeah, because they come from the original versions with Jim Steinman when they were just playing as a duo, and Jim was hammering out the melodies to support what Meatloaf was doing, and they just left that in the final orchestrations, even if it was Roy Bittan playing piano, and there would be supplemental parts. But when I worked with Meatloaf, I noticed that this was like, some even called it like rehearsal style, but it was in the final versions, and all it did was make the melodies even more pronounced. And so I do a little bit of that in Kansas on some of the songs I wrote. And I even saw somebody criticize me for it and say, you shouldn't be playing the piano like that. You shouldn't be playing the vocal melody. I was like, it's my song. I played it however I wanted to. And the band around me dug it. So therefore, what I did was the way it was supposed to be. And it's like, I know what I'm doing. But there are other instances where, you want to carve that out, remove it, let the vocal just have that space themselves and play something else that supports it. At the end of the day, whatever works, whether or not you follow any arbitrary rules or guidelines.
I mean, that's it, isn't it? And you'll always have those critics because like this, they're looking at Kansas' back catalog and they're seeing, the songs you're playing. You'll always have these naysayers and you'll always have somebody. And it doesn't matter who you are. The bigger your profile rises and the more credit you get for doing a good job, there's always somebody to try and knock you, isn't there?
Sure. And I didn't lose any sleep over it. You're never going to please everyone, so you might as well. I know it sounds like that old Ricky Nelson song, but you really have to stay true to how you want it to be and be honest about it. Because if you're just chasing what you think it's supposed to be, then you might not like how it came out, and then it's like you're not going to be as honest and passionate about expressing it. So yeah, I mean, there's so many cooks in the kitchen, but I think when it comes down to it, people have to listen with their ears and not with a set of instructions on what it's supposed to be. And as someone who I did the formal education route, I have a college degree in music, and I teach. I've taught in colleges and uh, taught private lessons, and I've written a lot of instructional materials and have a book out of keyboard exercises, and also wrote many articles for Keyboard Magazine over the last 20 years. And so I understand that there's this impulse to want to be correct and do it by the book. But to me, I always found music theory as two things: as a, a way to just communicate ideas to each other, and also potential solutions. Like if you're writing something and you want to get from one place to another musically, there's a toolkit in music theory that you can try. Whereas a lot of people think of it as like a keeping score sort of thing where you have to abide by certain structural or theory norms or rules. But that's not interesting to me and not necessary for me. I play rock and roll music. There's no rules there.
Yeah, no, and you have to be freer in that style as well. And the question I want to ask you as well, because I know from my background, I was a self-taught guitarist, and I started later in life. I only started playing when I was 20. It was one of those things I always said to people. I used to be watching music videos, and there'd be bands playing, and I kind of started following Joe Satriani. I liked his kind of style of playing, but I only had two strings on this acoustic guitar. And basically, I was kind of playing linear. I would play up and down the string, scales and stuff like this. And then when I noticed that was a style in itself, but then I put the rest of the strings on the guitar maybe a year later. I said, I'm going to actually learn this now. And I taught myself, and then I progressed to, met some friends, started busking, and then you progress to bands and so on. And like this was different because usually you do this when you're in your teens, but I was doing it in my 20s, so it was a 10-year ahead, and, setting up bands in your 20s and everything. But it's amazing for me because, when you're self-taught, then I didn't have that formal education in music, but I did the whole, learning by ear, learning songs, sitting down, and then I started teaching, and I still did a lot of stuff by ear. And then later on, I started learning more theory. When you teach, you have to learn. And then as I progress more into sheet music and everything. But the question I have for you is, when you are going to play with any touring band or any musicians now, do you find that you tend to rely more on your ear, or do you kind of say, I'm going to look at the sheet music?
I never get sheet music for any of these gigs. When I played with Meatloaf, yes, Camel, Debbie Harry, Kansas, no one has ever provided any sheet music because most of these groups have done it by ear, and Kansas.
Exactly.
And yes, those bands, they started off as garage bands, and they figured it out. So that's what I had to do. So I've had to learn everything by ear. And so I always stress that that's a really important skill to have, because it was probably one of the top skills necessary to do the gigs that I've done. And so I know how to write the stuff down and to notate it and to transcribe it and reference it. And I know what all the nomenclature is of what the chords are, and I can make transcriptions or charts, and I have. I notated every note, in fact, so I would have it as a sort of a tome, as a resource that I could go back to year after year if I needed to. And so it was incumbent on me, when you get to this level of gig, it's expected of you to figure it out. Now, there are exceptions, like if you're playing with a big band, like or with a pop singer like Michael Bublé or something like that. Now, those are tight arrangements for a full big band. Yeah, you're gonna get charts and sheet music for that. And when I played with Renaissance, I was recreating orchestral parts from the original recording. And so they actually did provide me with the scores and the conductor reductions for a lot of their parts. So I did have a little bit of support in that regard, but it was still up to me to figure out how to orchestrate it down for two hands to play. So it's not just cut and paste, sit down and put a piece of sheet music in front of you and do the gig. There's still a lot of legwork that involves the ear that has to be done.
You can hear it in that kind of music because, as you said, a lot of this great progressive music was created, on the fly, and then people improvise and they write, melodic lines over melodic lines that are already there. So a lot of the time, you can see when the musician goes back to relearn their own songs, or even new musicians come in, it kind of is faster even learning it by ear, I imagine, in that case. I know for me it is anyway, because I'm primarily an ear musician. So, but I always kind of wonder when you have someone who's in the middle who does both, for them, the ear is probably the fastest way for touring musicians, I imagine, no?
I think so. Well, everyone's mileage may vary because it also has to do with the pure volume of material. Like if you have a ton of music to learn, then having written music is really does come in handy. But having from full transcriptions to cheat sheets to charts, anything that can get you where you need to be. But if it's a tight set and you're going to be doing that one set of 10 to 20 songs for a long time, and learning it by ear really helps you internalize it, I think, the best. Because I found that gigs that I've had to do more reading on, I get kind of dependent on it almost. Whereas when you memorize things by ear, it becomes internalized, I think, for me, a little bit more quickly.
Let's have a look then. Obviously with Spiraling, you had 4 albums, 2 EPs, and you toured. And then with that, when that kind of finished up or went on hiatus or whatever, was it something then that you thought, okay, what am I going to do now? Will I look for work as a touring musician, or were you approached to play with other artists?
I've always had this sort of parallel track. Even when Spiraling was very active, was when I got called for Meatloaf and for Yes, which I did. And I was trying to find a way how to make all of it coexist. I'd go on the road with Meatloaf and then come back and do some recordings and touring with my band. And I had this life as a touring musician for hire going on at the same time as aspiring artist, creating and producing my own work. And it was a bit of a juggling act. And to be absolutely honest and clear, I never sought out the touring work. I liked getting the work, but once I, one before Meatloaf, I was playing with Glenn Burtnick, who is a New Jersey artist, who I did some of his gigs, played the music the way he wanted to be from the albums.
He plays with Styx, doesn't he, as well? And
he did at the time, yeah. And this was for his solo work. And so that led to me getting an audition with Meatloaf. He referred me to Kazim Sultan, who was a songwriting partner of his and who was Meatloaf's musical director and bassist at the time, in the late 90s. And so I did that audition, got the gig, was Meatloaf's pianist for about 3 years. Yes heard about me through that, asked me to audition, via making my own recording of Close to the Edge and Gates of Delirium, 2 20-minute songs. And from there, I got the Yes gig, and it was very clearly defined that I'd be doing the Yes Symphonic Tour in 2001, and then that's it. Fine with me. Dream come true. That was the band. I had the posters up on the wall when I was a kid. So it was like, all right,
That was like full cycle because, these are bands that inspired you, and then you're on stage with them, and you're like, wow, it's crazy.
Yeah, it was almost like virtual reality. They get to play a game, like play with your favorite band. But it was quite real. And the Yes experience opened up the Pandora's box of all the progressive bands. It was from there that Camel heard of me, Renaissance, The Sin, and even all the way up to, working with Anderson Stolt and then The Sea Within and Kansas. There is a lineage, but it really, Yes was like the gold standard for progressive rock. So when prog bands needed a keyboardist, my name would come up. And all along, I'm still trying to push Spiraling. And then when Spiraling hung it up, I what my first decision was to go do my solo album where I played most everything on the record, give or take a couple.
Hurry Up and Smell the Roses. Yeah, great album.
Yeah, and that was it. Well, thank you. And that was really one of my goals, was to set up a house full of instruments and just write and record and see what happens. So that was a real bucket list item for me, and I had to stop making myself available for other tours. In fact, I had to leave my post at Renaissance to go and do this. So I got that achieved, and then it was like, all right, let's get back to working and sort of make myself available to these other gigs. And See Within came along, which was interesting because I was going to be a creative partner in that. Which all the groups I mentioned before that, I was a side person. I was playing parts that were there already, the way they wanted them to be played. And a lot of people in the prog rock scene didn't even know that I was a songwriter, because Spiraling was not a progressive rock band per se. It was more of like a power pop meets synth rock sort of modern thing. Some people in the progressive scene, they just knew me as a touring keyboardist for Yes or Camel, etc. So I was really overjoyed that when finally came to Kansas asking me to join, they wanted me to be a real member of the band, writing with the group. They put trust in me creatively to be a real part of this ongoing story of this band.
It's great, obviously, when you can be in demand, but like you said there's that point as well where you want to kind of do your own stuff. But in doing your own stuff, you have to build a following, and then you have to also pay the bills, and you have to work and get your name out there. But then one can override the other, isn't it? And sometimes it becomes this monster. And the more well known you became, the more in demand you became. So you have to put possibly other albums on the back burner till you find that window of opportunity.
Yeah, I could have put myself out there as a touring musician at large after the Yes experience and really try to make the most of that track. But I knew that it was important for me to have a vision and write songs, something I've always loved to do. And spiraling was something that I was really trying to pursue for a long time. And I knew that I would be playing the what if game for years to come if I didn't take a shot with it. And we went from, I mean, I had some form of spiraling for 15 years, but we really gave it a good shot. And at our peak, we were a damn good band. I was really proud of what we were doing.
Yeah, no, good band and great sound. And the thing is like that, isn't it? It's music is a hard industry, and we kind of gravitate towards what we want to do. That's our ultimate dream. But then always, you can get sidetracked, but not in a bad way, in a productive way, in a work way, and in a way that gives you an income and gives you a career. But of course, it's like any person who has a dream for their band or their music to make it. You always want to keep pushing it. But I suppose the good thing is that the more freedom you get from having a musical career, you also then have the chance to do your own thing later on, because maybe you have a bit more financial freedom, maybe you have more, how will I put it, like, networking, more people, so it can help you out in your own career. Yes.
It was a balancing act for sure. What happens is, the grim realities of making a living and paying the bills, as you say, they're always there. And so it's easy to say, oh, I'm just going to put my sideman work on hold and just do my band. Well, with what money? How is the power going to stay on? And so I would come home from the Meatloaf tour and plug some of that cash into making an EP with Spiraling, or come back from the Yes tour, throw some of those proceeds into making the album, because spiraling, it all ended up, the bills all came to me, fine, because that's the cost of having all the creative control, is that you also got to pay.
I know that too well, because when I started this podcast, it was originally a thing from my band Collective Whisper, and it's one of those things where I would sit at home, write the music, do all of the things, and people say, oh, it's kind of like egotistical, but it's not. I just kind of always sat down and I would get a guitar line or a vocal melody, and then I have this kind of composing kind of idea where I build on it, and I do, let's say, keyboard parts and different parts, and you build on it, and the bass and everything. And then you kind of realize, okay, I don't need a band or other people to do this. But when you want to go and play it live, then obviously you need to get people. But because they don't have quite the same input or the connection with it, like you do as the composer, it's harder as well in these types of bands, isn't it?
Yeah, because there has to be some sort of upside potential. And if a person has that potential to be in a profitable group that they really like, that led us to playing a lot of shows in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night for no money because we were just so we were just trying to get
Yeah.
ourselves out there. But it's interesting because this is a common item that's thought about by a lot of musicians. They're saying, should I just have a day job that's unrelated to music altogether, pay the bills, and then when I'm not doing that, I'm pursuing my craft, my art? Or should I get another job in music, maybe playing weddings or playing covers or something like that? And it's a toss up because that can also it's whatever you can do to keep your baby alive and to keep it thriving. Because I know some musicians that went into that transactional music route and they don't create anymore. They've made it the job. So it can be a trap. And you're saying, well, I'm still doing music. And it's like, well, are you doing the music you like? And this is key because one of the things that happened to me in the mid 2000s when I was really pursuing spiraling and not making myself available for a lot of sideman work, still had to pay the bills. And so Keyboard Magazine comes along and they're like, hey, write some articles for us. Now, it was just a little bit of a side income I wasn't writing a lot for them, but I was writing something every month. But here was the thing, like you're talking about networking. I would meet people in the industry who just think of you as one thing. They thought, oh, you're a writer and that's it. And I'm like, well, I'm a musician primarily. And I played with some of these huge names, demanding gigs, and people like to think simply and they like to think of each person they know as one thing.
And it's what you're doing right now, isn't it?
It is. It's what are you doing now? What have you done for me lately? and so so in a way, I mean, I don't regret so much working with Keyboard Magazine. I met some great people along the way, and I always enjoyed that magazine. It really helped me learn about what it means to be a modern musician. But at the same time, it's people can fall into traps, but it is, I think, the bottom line is that you have to, if you really have something to say musically and you want to be that type of artist or that kind of musician, I think it's important just to make sure that gets preserved. Even if you're working as an accountant during the day, as long as you're not too tired when you get home from work and you want to say something. I think it's like life is too short to say, oh, I really wish.
I think it's a struggle for a lot of people. And every year you get older, and the more bills need to be paid and you family members and more people to support, you can kind of start putting your dream backwards in the line or on the back burner. And it is a struggle to keep it going, to say, okay, I'm going to write those songs, I'm going to produce that music, I'm going to do it. Because if you're not getting the feedback or you're not getting the attention that maybe it deserves, it's hard. And then obviously the financial thing is a big thing because, like people, we always laugh in Ireland because people say, are you still at the music? People say it to people all the time as if like, oh, isn't it really nice you tried it, but it didn't work out. And musicians are always going like, but I'm still doing it. Don't count me out yet.
Right. Because in a way, it's funny, Bill Bruford once said about playing drums. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of playing drums is something you really shouldn't do unless you can't live without it.
Yes.
And I love that because I feel like that's music. That's playing anything. It's like playing music professionally or that, going for a career in music is something you really shouldn't do unless you can't live without it, because it's full of a lot of pain and a lot of things that can kill your love for this special thing, creating music. So I think it's like treat yourself with respect and don't let anyone else disrespect you, and just be fair, be honest, and create the music you want to create, how you want to do it. And it may or may not bring the financial rewards, but cover your bases. But it's
survive, stay on the raft.
Yeah, and just make sure that you're not like just doing something that's kind of like what you want to do. Do what you really want to do, but be responsible as well.
Of course. I want to talk just in a minute about the Hurry Up and Smell the Roses in a bit more detail. But I want to ask you, with the style of music with Kansas and with Yes, they're similar in a lot of ways in that prog rock. But playing with Debbie Harry and playing with Meatloaf, were those kind of very different styles, or was it something that you found more challenging or unexpected challenges?
I thought that they were very different at first. When I was offered the chance to audition for Meatloaf, I said, Meatloaf? I don't do that. And then when I was in it, I realized, oh, we're playing big bombastic rock with a lot of changes and movements and drama and everything. There are a lot of similarities to what I grew up liking. And it was like very fun to play in that band, and very interesting to learn about how to work a huge crowd from Meatloaf himself. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, because Meatloaf is kind of dramatic musical rock. I mean, if somebody looked at Meatloaf's back catalogue, and obviously Bad Out of Hell and all these albums, they're very dramatic and very musical, and they look like they're written for Broadway.
Yeah. And with Debbie Harry, a similar thing. Like this is like her solo work, which was like very synth pop type of thing. And I said, I have some of that in my DNA. And it was like, yeah, there's a lot of common threads in certain in these things that on the surface seem like they're very different. Now, I also like putting myself in unfamiliar situations. Going back to the high school and college, I mean, I wanted to play anywhere with anybody, and I mean, I was playing poetry slams with rappers, backing them, doing live loops, like with a jazz combo, like we were playing live as if we were samples. So we were like repeating these 4-bar phrases, these 2-bar things, like for rappers who were freestyling, or I would play some sort of acoustic music, I went to India to teach and was collaborating with a lot of the Indian musicians, just coming up with something right then and there that was hard to describe.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that whole dynamic. And I imagine then after when you kind of going to play with Yes and then eventually on to Kansas. But for you, because you're an amazing musician, but there comes a point, I suppose, when you're playing with certain groups that you have an ability and you have a certain level you have to be at. But then when you go playing with prog rock groups, I know obviously you have a history with those types of groups too, but when you go back playing as a touring musician with prog rock groups and they're not your own songs, you kind of have to step it up a little bit, don't you?
Yes. And the way I look at it is I put myself in the position of a member of the audience. Because people ask me, they're like, do you get to change the parts or do you have to play them exactly as they were originally intended? And I say, I want to recreate the parts as they were originally intended as a foundation, because those albums mean so much to so many people. It brings them back to their happiest days of listening to the tape or the album or whatever. And I don't want to mess with that. I want to be, if they're coming to a Kansas concert now, there's certainly part of them that wants to feel the way they did when they listened to Point of No Return in 1978. So I like geeking out on the sounds and trying to emulate the original synth sounds, the original piano parts, the original organ tones and the parts, and have that be the core. But, and this is important, I also want to make sure that people know that they're at a concert and not just listening to an old recording. So you got to pick your moments, and I do. I try to say, okay, these are some synth solos or some organ solos. I could take a left turn here and do something spontaneous. But if I'm playing the organ solo in Carry On My Wayward Son, it's very quick and very iconic. So I'm going to do that the way it was. But when I did the Close to the Edge organ solo on Yes Symphonic Live, I played about 80% of it like what was written that Rick Wakeman played. When I say written, I mean through composed. Again, I had to learn it all by ear. But I was like, let me throw in just a little bit of me, like just so, like, to put a little unique stamp on it. So it's like I'm not just trying to cover something, but this is its own unique thing, and you can listen to the symphonic live and say, okay, there's just like a little bit of a flair there that deviates just enough, in my view.
It's quite interesting with Yes. I actually recently, I think about 2 months ago, I just stumbled upon like a documentary on Sky Arts from the UK on Yes. And they were talking with Rick Wakeman and talking with the band. And, Yes obviously had so many changes in the band. And, some people said they became a different band and everything. And even obviously with Owner of a Lonely Heart, the style was so different. So I can imagine when you're playing with Kansas and with Yes, there are some songs that are not like the style of the rest of the songs. So, for example, obviously with Kansas, Dust in the Wind, Carry On Wayward Son, but then there's so many other songs that have they have a far more progressive feel, whereas those ones are more commercial or more poppy.
Yeah, and the solution is to start with the source and say, all right, if we're playing Dust in the Wind, what is the source of Dust in the Wind? It's this beautiful, tender ballad. And when we play Dust in the Wind live, I play the cello part. That's my job. And recreate that. And again, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. People want to hear Dust in the Wind the way they remember it. So we play it that way. But at the end of the song, David Ragsdale, our violinist, he, instead of doing the fade out like the original recording, we play, he plays this beautiful little solo that was not on the original recording at the end, but it's appropriate. It's part of what you're going to hear. And so, and if we're playing a song that's really deep prog from that area, we're gonna go for it the way it was originally intended and look for our spots. And or if we play something from 80s Kansas, I'm using the 80s synth patches and I just look to the source as the inspiration.
Obviously, with those types of bands, the sounds are really important. So one thing for me I discovered when I was playing the MIDI synth guitar was, trying to access these kind of patches and sounds, and it's quite difficult. And I'm sure it's the exact same for keyboard players. And there are certain sounds you go back to, like the pads and the synths. But for you nowadays in your touring, do you rely a lot more on using the sounds in your keyboards, or do you use more software more than the keyboard sounds?
Everything is available. So in my live rig, I have 4 keyboards on my riser. That's not including, we also have a little acoustic section where I play something else, but I have 4 keyboards. One of them is dedicated for piano. That's the Nordgrand. One of them is dedicated for organ, which is a Hammond organ, and I use a real Leslie speaker on stage to try to get that real rich Hammond tone. And then I have 2 synthesizers. I have a Prophet Rev 2, which is a modern synth, and the Mini Moog Voyager, which was made in 2004, which is now a classic. It's funny because I still think of that as the new keyboard, right? That Moog made.
Can I ask you a question with that Mini Moog? I watched your video of Stepping Out with Joe Jackson. Did you play Mini Moog on that video?
I used the Moog Little Fatty.
Oh, the Fatty, that one's different, yeah.
Which, yeah, that was a little, sort of the next one that come out after the Voyager. So I use the sounds from all these keyboards, but I also have them all networked into the laptop where they can drive those sounds from the synth emulations. So, the computer just becomes this very powerful tone module with all these other sounds available for me to play from any keyboard. And so I use something called Syntronic from IK Multimedia, which is a package of emulations of classic synth sounds. So I use some of that, and I do a little research to see what Kansas used in the 70s for it, and I use that, and I also use it for some realistic sounds too. If we want realistic strings or brass or orchestral sounds, the computer is a good workhorse for that. So it's a hybrid for me.
There's very good emulation software like Kemper and Line 6 and all these have some good software for emulating guitar sounds and, being able to listen to a guitar tone and emulate it. So has that evolved in the same way for keyboards, where a keyboard player can't find a particular patch, but he can go to a piece of software and it can emulate the sound? Is that possible?
Yeah, more so than ever now. Yeah, they're getting really good at recreating a lot of the nuances. There's still something about playing one of those classic synths in the flesh that
Right, of
is
course.
is really hard to put your finger on. It's those intangible qualities. Same thing with guitar players and old amps or guitars. But what we call the modeling of the instruments has become more and more detailed and more deep, and certainly good enough that I'm playing some of these sounds, and some of the original members of Kansas who are still in the band who that turn to me and say, "I haven't heard that sound since the '70s," and it works. So, but ultimately, I do a lot. I do my own programming. I don't have a synth programmer on tour with me. And I'm a bit of a historian and a geek of this stuff. So I love to really say, okay, this was a clavinet, so I'm going to look for the best clavinet emulation, and it's also about how you play it and how you go about it. So ultimately, your fingers still have so much to do because it's the chord voicings, it's the way the melodic lines are played. It's not just what you buy. You really have to put some knowledge and some study into it.
I suppose what I'm asking more is, I know you can, let's say, go to Syntronic and say, 80s clavinet, 80s synth and find those. But is there a particular software that you use where you can actually program the sound yourself without like getting a pre-existing patch? Is there a software that will emulate keyboards that the user can use?
Yeah, and even in Syntronic, there are a lot of user editable parameters, and you can. Yeah, but there are some, and there's this other company called Cherry Audio, which I use a lot of their synths now, and the front panel on the screen is a complete recreation of like an old Korg or an old Moog or an old Prophet or something. And so you can build a sound from scratch with the same ingredients that you would if you were looking at the real thing right in front of you. So it's not just a snapshot of the sound or a sample of the sound, but it's actually, that's when you hear them talking about modeling, that to me is what it's all about. It's like, we're going to model all the characteristics, all the original functions. So if you want to start from zero and build the sound just like they did in the '70s or the '80s, like, you can do it. And sure, the purist in me is going to do the blind taste test and say, oh, I can still tell what the original is. But
Of course.
it's solid, it's reliable, stays in tune. But I do like to keep some of the real analog stuff. That's why I have the Mini Moog on stage with me, because we still use some of the sounds, because there's just such a beefiness to those old analog instruments that I like to keep in the mix.
When you're using Syntronic and some of these applications, do you run them all through, like, for example, something like Mainstage or Gig Performer? Do you have like a master application that you put them in, or you use different applications together?
I use Mainstage on the Mac, so that's the environment where all of these software instruments live, and where I have all my keyboards mapped and my foot pedals that are mapped to tell Mainstage to go to the next sound whenever I hit the pedal. And that's something that I even did before Mainstage or laptops were even feasible, where when I was with Yes and with Meatloaf, we had a hardware unit that was like a MIDI patcher, and I had the foot pedal connected to it. So if I was playing some sounds, I hit the foot pedal, it sends the messages to all my instruments to go to the next appropriate sound. It's much easier to do now with the laptop, but because back then you had to really know some hexadecimal computer programming to do it. And I was like, this is not where I'm at. So now you can see it on the screen.
Yeah. What's interesting is, like when I was saying there, the problem I found when you start programming MIDI synths and, MIDI guitars and everything, you just use so much time and you're like, oh, I have to learn the song too. And what I found was I was using this Axon MIDI synth, and it was really cool because on the guitar neck, you could, like, in the same way you could split a keyboard, like, so you have strings, clavinet and then piano. You could do the same. So on the first 3 frets, when you played guitar, the synth wouldn't work. It was there. So it read the scale length of the string. But then when you go up to the 7th, 8th or whatever, let's say you're playing an E minor, well, then that sound in that particular fret would be of the piano or whatever. But the problem is you have to sit down and program all of this out on the computer or on the hardware device, and you have maybe 3 or 4 songs in one sound. So that takes up a lot of time. So for you, I imagine programming sounds for Meatloaf concerts and all this, it's very time consuming also.
Yes. Now, back in the Meatloaf and Yes days, I had a little bit of help with my techs. Robbie Eagle was my tech on the Yes tour, and he got his hands dirty with the sounds too, and that was all hardware. So we were all twiddling the knobs up on the riser. Now with Kansas, it's all on me, and so what some people don't realize is that not only have I had to learn every single note, but I've made my own job a little tougher because I want to get the sounds right. Like I could have done half of the effort on the sounds front and been acceptable, but I want to go above and beyond. And I love the idea of like giving somebody the chills. They're going, I remember that sound. I want to transport people. And so it's fun for me to try to be as authentic as possible and at the same time, like have it sound good. Sometimes you can get something that might be technically authentic, but it might not necessarily be very pleasing in the band context. So I just still want everything to sound rockin'. And but I've had double the job. It's not just the player, but I'm also the programmer.
It's the sequencing and programming and everything. I'm going to ask my last technical question now. When you are playing and you are using those sounds, do you have like a backup Mac, for example? Because any computer can crash. So if you're doing a big show like that, do you have another backup of the computer open and ready?
I should. I should. And I've done that in the past where I've had a redundant setup ready to go. And my friend David Rosenthal, who plays with Billy Joel, is the master of this. He's got two Mac systems running in parallel. And if one goes down, he just clicks a switch and it goes to the V rig. I don't have that at the moment. I'm living a little bit dangerously, but I do have a backup plan and I've had to use it from time to time. So if my computer goes down, I still have the organ going and I still have the piano going and the Minimo going. So I still have the hardware available now. And if something from the hardware goes down, I got to just go to another synth. So if that happens, then the audience will be treated to a rare customized thing where I was playing a piano part on organ or playing a synth part on piano or something like that. It'll work in a pinch. It's not my preferred way. I'd love to just have a B rig running at the same time silently. So if I have to wave the white flag, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with machines and machines will fail.
Of course.
But it's a type of thing where it's on me right now to just have an escape route.
No, because I remember I was reading an interview with Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, and he was talking about how, for a lot of their concerts now, they use Mainstage for the guitars, for the keyboards, for everything. And he said, obviously, when you're so reliant on, guitar sound, keyboard sounds, all coming through patches and Mainstage, you have to have backups. So he said, if there's 3 or 4 members using laptops and they're using, guitars into Mainstage or, keyboards or whatever, they have, let's say, a secondary laptop that's ready to just switch over. So, I suppose it's sometimes luck. You could never use it, but I'm sure in some cases the computer dies.
It's bound to happen. And it's just it's the trade-off.
It's the trade-off.
You get all the sounds you could ever want at your fingertips. And also, like, there have been occasions where we've had to fly very great distance to do a show. Like we went up to Alaska to perform and we didn't have all of our own gear. We were using rental equipment, but I was able to just bring the laptop with me and connect the rental equipment to the laptop. So I still had some semblance of my real sound. So there are pros and cons, as with most things in life.
Yes, of course. But I just want to ask you then, obviously, with Hurry Up and Smell the Roses in 2012. So when you wrote that, I know it's been kind of described as like cinematic pop and everything. And it has a lovely sound. I was actually listening to a lot of it today, and it has a really nice sound. And it reminds me of other styles of music together. And it's hard to, what I like about it, it's hard to say what style it is. And for me, that's cool because you don't know. But I imagine when you do that, you take inspiration and influence from all the music you've, grew up with, but even all the bands you've played with, like Meatloaf and, Yes and Kansas and all that. So do you think, for the next album you do like that, I'm sure you've tons of material written. Do you think that it will be of a similar vein or you have evolved differently?
One of my goals with Hurry Up and Smell the Roses was to get back to an intimate sound, because I had just finished my time with my rock band, and it was all about getting the excitement and getting the power, and getting people's attention, because we were an opening band most of the time. We were a support act. So it was like we had to win them over right away. And one of the central themes of Hurry Up and Smell the Roses is patience. That's why the name of the album is a contradiction, because, and the title track deals with that. Is it, do you relax and sit back and enjoy life, or do you hustle and get the most out of life and don't waste any moment? You know, there's these conflicting messages that we get. And I wanted to encapsulate that musically too. And I also was like, let's do the ballads. I don't have to worry about rocking out. I don't have a band. So it went into this gentler sound for that album. And I just rode that wave because I knew that I had that ability to make the music breathe. I wasn't worried about trying to get to the point in 10 seconds or whatever. I wanted the music to unfold. And that was really the central concept in doing that album. Now, what I do is I always write without any sort of preconceived notion of what it's going to be. I just write first and sort it out later. So I've got a whole basket full of songs that are really appropriate for Kansas. I have those ballads coming still, and I have synth pop. I have stuff that sounds like spiraling. And my goal is to just create without worrying about it, so I can get the creative flow going and get the most honest expression. And then I'm going to look at all of it when it's all, I don't want to say done, but when it's like the songs are realized, and that will kind of guide me to what's coming next. I had assumed that the next sort of solo album I do, or a project that I lead, would be more in a band sound again, because I'm getting back to wanting to work with creative musicians and have that interplay. So it may take on a different quality than Hurry Up and Smell the Roses, but it's still going to be me. But my real priority is just continuing to create for Kansas. And I've got so much music, especially after learning all that material for the tour. I was bound to start writing stuff in that language. And so that's why I was able to get a lot of my work on the last album, The Absence of Presence.
Absence of Presence, good album too.
Thank you. Yeah. And so whatever I'm up to next, I want to funnel it through Kansas and see what we do next. I mean, really post pandemic, we're trying to get our live touring back to where it was. And so that's really where the band's head is at, but I'm not stopping creating, because we may head back in the studio and do some new music. We're actually recording a special new track now that I can't talk about, but it'll be coming out sometime.
A question for you. In researching you, and then I came across a show that, you know, a lot of people have watched, is Supernatural, and the connection with Supernatural and Kansas, Carry On Wayward Son, and then the story, then they were trying to get Kansas to play the final show and everything. Because I know Jensen Ackles, they filmed Kansas. Was that during your time or was that before?
We just filmed something that aired on a TV show called Walker.
Yeah, the Walker, Texas Rangers.
The new version starring Jared Padalecki, and Jensen Ackles directed the episode. And it just so happened that we were in Austin, Texas at a time when they were going to film an episode there. And we got together and did it because, like you said, they originally wanted to get us to perform on the finale of Supernatural. But because of COVID and lockdowns and everything, and getting to Canada where they were filming at the time, it wasn't going to happen. So they rewrote the episode without us playing a part in it, and filmed it in LA. And so they all felt bad about it because they really wanted to get Kansas involved somehow. So now with this Walker experience and having Jared and Jensen be part of it, they were like, let's make it happen. And so that we filmed that back in February, and it aired in April. So I was involved with that, and it was really cool to be a part of it. And it's fun. Doing TV is fun.
I haven't watched that episode yet because I was only reading that today. But was it something that you filmed in a theater without an audience or with an audience?
Oh, it's with an audience. In fact, it was on the site of the place where we were to play that night, our proper concert. So we just got there early. Everybody set up early. They brought all the cameras in, and they brought a crowd in to watch us play and to scream and holler and get into it. people who were lucky enough to answer the call for extras that morning. And
what a great extra gig.
They just got to watch Kansas play for a while. And we played Wayward Son. We did it a few times, as you do, because they want to set up cameras in different positions and have as many options as possible to pick the shots they want. So we played the song about 3 or 4 times, and the crowd was going crazy every time. And then it was like, okay, we're done. They did their thing and packed up and got all their cameras out of there. And then a few hours later, we were back on stage doing the real concert.
You were back on stage. What a night. What a day and what a night.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that all the time, filming a TV show, right? Because everything was set up and we're locked into the show. We were just ready to bang it out.
That's like the best sound check ever, really, isn't it?
Totally.
Tom Brislin, thank you very much for coming on the show. Such a varied career. I mean, it's really interesting. And when I came across your profile and I was like, oh, wow, this Tom is playing with Kansas and everything. And with Kansas and these types of bands, you see, obviously, you hear the music, but sometimes you don't always know who the touring musicians are. And it's nice to delve in and see who's currently playing with them. So best of luck with everything and continued success with your career. I know it's going to go onwards and upwards. And good luck with the next album. We'll be looking out for it. And best of luck with everything. And thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks again for having me. It's been great to talk to you, and hope to do it again sometime.
Perfect. Tom Brislin, everybody. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tom Brislin, current keyboardist with Kansas, that amazing band. And, you have some of your own amazing music, Tom, and such a varied career as well. I mean, playing with Yes and playing with all these other bands, Debbie Harry, Meatloaf, so many other progressive rock bands. Such an amazing career. So well done so far, and we look forward to hearing more continuing music from you and from Kansas and other groups like this. So thank you again, Tom Brislin. Okay, everybody, hope you enjoyed that episode. And we just like to say to you guys, thank you for being here and thank you for coming along as usual. And stay tuned. We have lots more guests coming up this season and we hope you will be with us all through. Look after yourself. Look after your family. My name is Simon Kay. This is the Collective Whisper podcast. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.